Welcome to Silicon Reel. Thanks for being here, Carlos.
Thank you.
Awesome, man. I'm curious if you guys are familiar with the term OG. Have you heard of this? It's a term in the hood.
If you put an M in it, I'm
MOG?
OMG.
OMG. No, that's not good. OG is a term in the hood for original gangster. It's like a term of respect shown to like the guys back in the day, the gangbangers that made it all happen. And, I thought of that when I thought of Seedcamp. These guys have been here since '07. That's a long time, That's back in the day when the roundabout probably had, tumbleweeds and gunfights and stuff. And so I wanted to ask, Carlos.
Is that the first time you've been referred to as original gangster, Carlos?
I'm Latin American, called a gangster. It's got other repercussions.
Yeah,
Okay, fair enough.
There could be some lawsuits.
I love that.
But we hear, incubation and acceleration. We've had lots of people through here, but we haven't had a lot of people that have been doing this for 6 years. So I was wondering if you could tell us, from what you've seen over the last 6 years, what's the state of the union when it comes to seed investing in London? How has it changed and what's going on right now?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, the evolution of all of this. And there's actually two evolutions if you want to talk about them. There's one is kind of the overall ecosystem. Another one is of stuff like what Seedcamp is, right? Because people sometimes throw this term accelerator or incubator and they kind of use them interchangeably, but they're actually not the same thing. And the incubator wave had its roots, in the late 90s. And that's a whole different thing we can talk about if you want.
Yes, I would like to do that because we do lump them together all the time. And I don't think, especially newbies like myself, we don't know the exact differences.
But then sort of your original question was sort of in 2007, what was things like? And, if you look back at the cost of starting a startup back in, let's say, early 2000s, it was really high, right? You had to buy your own infrastructure, your own hardware. You had a huge amount of sort of build before you can even test it, put it out there. And you could argue that economy of scale of the cloud services coming online late 2007 and 2006, you really started having the context in which you could have these startups test things out, see if there's a customer base, and then scale it if there is one. And on that basis, you started having a whole bunch of startups popping up that just didn't have the capital to make it happen. And that's kind of where Seedcamp was born. So here, there was a lot of, obviously there were investors and they were looking for deals and there were deals to be had, but they tended to gravitate towards the sort of the more established kind of company that already had some level of traction, that already had some level of monetization. There was a clear business plan and a business strategy. There wasn't that much of I have an awesome idea, I can bang it out, put it together and test out whether or not customers really want it and then look for a certain amount of money just to get me to that next phase. That didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And so in 2007, Reshma and Saul had this sort of idea of, well, let's bring together all the investors from the community and provide that support in the way of a seed camp. And it was a one-off event a year at that time. It was just designed to bring everybody into the room. So the original one had pretty much the entire ecosystem show up. And it was around basically how do we support these young guys that want to have some cash to test it out, see how it goes. And it's amazing to see kind of how those companies are different from the ones that are today. They were really the pioneers because they were testing things out very lean, before lean was cool.
Right.
And they were testing these things out with very low cash and getting it to the market and sometimes before their time. If you look at one of our companies that we sold recently, it was called Rent Mine Online. We sold it to RealPage. It was collaborative consumption before collaborative consumption was cool. The Airbnb made that cool. But it was stuff that didn't exist, but we enabled it to happen. So I wouldn't say it was the wild, wild west. It's just the cost basis globally to build a startup on the cheap or cheap-ish was just not possible technologically until that time started coming around. And then from that point onwards, Seedcamp was, whereas in the US you had YC and maybe a few other organizations that were doing this in every state maybe to some extent, we were the only ones in Europe, which obviously is indicative of maybe the state of things in those days. And then we helped scale that. Then of course, Seedcamp has evolved over the years and we've had, we've gone from 1 event a year to 12 events a year to, I think this year we've done, probably gonna hit 20 or so And in each one of those, we meet tons of new companies. We get about 2,000 plus applicants a year, 200 which we'll meet in person, and about 20 or 30 that we'll invest in. So that just kind of gives you a feeling for that evolution, but the origins back in 2000.
In my situation was really sit down and hash out what is our vision, what are our different roles, kind of what's expected from each person. And I think those are things that can make or break a company or a project.
That's good advice. We haven't heard that one before.
Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, the co-founder stuff is cool. And you even see it, the Twitter co-founders had in the early days, and a lot of people think or are saying BlackBerry.